let's hop into the BRRRR strategy. Does it work in 2024? How is it smartest to approach it? And when should you actually use the BRRRR strategy? And what does BRRRR even stand for, Tyler?
The BRRRR strategy stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. So we're going to walk through if this strategy is something wise for you to break into and start using, or if you should potentially stay away from this strategy. So why do the BRRRR strategy? The thinking behind the BRRRR strategy is if I buy a property, fix it up to its ARV, its after renovation value, and then refinance it, I can potentially get all my initial capital back out. So what do I mean? Let's do simple math. Let's say you buy a property for $50,000, you invest $50,000 in it, and boom, it's all of a sudden worth $200,000 as an after renovated value. Well, if I refinance, the bank is going to give me a loan for 75% of the worth of that property. I take the property to the bank, I say, hey, I want a mortgage on it. It doesn't have a mortgage yet. I just renovated it. They're likely going to give you 75% loan to value. LTV stands for loan to value. Well, when they do that, they're going to cut me a check for $150,000. That's 75% of the after repair value of $200,000. Well, boom. My cost of doing the deal was $100,000. I bought the property for $50,000 and I renovated it for $50,000 all in. So I just made actually $50,000 by renovating that property, and I get to keep the property. I get to keep the cash cow. I don't have to sell the cow. In a flip, you have to sell the property. You never make another dime from that property. Whereas with the BRRRR strategy, you get to keep the property. The example I just gave is the best case scenario. In 2024, I can assure you, you will probably not find a $50,000 property that you can invest $50,000 and it's worth $200,000. Those numbers are extremely hard to hit right now. Why? During COVID and during the years of the early 2020s, say 2020 through about 2022, property values accelerated like crazy. So asset values went up, house prices went up, cost of doing work went up tremendously. Cost of supplies like lumber, steel, copper for electrical went up. And so the cost of doing these deals is extremely high. Now the ARVs are higher as well, but there's not as much margin between there. So it is harder to execute on the BRRRR strategy. So to kind of anchor our discussion, I'm going to talk about some advantages to using the BRRRR strategy, and then I'm going to go into some disadvantages of using the BRRRR strategy, and then we'll wrap up this segment of the course. So number one, velocity of money. What do I mean there? I mean, my initial capital, I can recoup when I refinance. So that's a huge win. I could keep reusing the same seed capital, theoretically, if my BRRRR strategy is successful. Number two, you keep the underlying asset. You don't sell the cash cow. You get to keep the property and keep renting it out. Number three, a lot of times you have new capital expenditures. When you go in and you renovate that rental, you're adding in new flooring, maybe a new roof, new appliances. So that property that you've just renovated now has a lot of new features in it that you get to keep as a rental. Now, what are the disadvantages of the BRRRR strategy in 2024? Well, the reality is that a true cash out BRRRR, where your 75% loan to value on that refinance is equal to your all-in cost, is slim to none, at least in my city in Indianapolis, Indiana. If you are in a small rural area where property values are really cheap, it may be a little more possible, but do you really want a rental in Podunk Town, USA versus a thriving city with a bright economic future? I would rather invest in Indianapolis. What is more common is to leave some money in the deal. What do I mean? Well, usually, let's say our ARV, going back to our simple number, is $200,000. And my 75% loan to value on that refinance is $150,000. My all-in budget, let's just say our cost of doing the deal, was probably more like $160,000 to $175,000 in this market, just with where things cost. That means I'm going to leave between $10,000 to $20,000 in the deal to get into that property. Is that a win? Is that a loss? It depends on your goals and what you're looking to do. For me, if I'm getting in a property with only $10,000 to $20,000 that is now worth $200,000, that would be a win. Why? Because that is less than a 20% down loan would cost me. That is less than a 25% down loan would cost me to get in the deal. So I'm still getting the deal, recouping some of that initial capital invested. So we're still hitting some of that velocity of money. Now, the second disadvantage to the BRRRR is the risk of using hard money and short-term debt. Oftentimes people leverage hard money or fix and flip loans to get into these deals. It's very rare someone has the total cash sitting in a bank account to buy an asset, aka a property, renovate it, and then do the rent refinance. More often they use hard money. So usually they're taking out a loan from a lender that does this sort of thing, and they're paying between 10 and 15% on that debt. Well, when I factor in my 10 to 15% debt cost, in addition to my rehab cost, in addition to my holding costs, insurance, taxes, etc., that's even more cost of doing the deal. The third is oftentimes right now when you refinance with a 75% loan to value loan, oftentimes it is really hard to make that cash flow. Well, what do I mean? Going back to our discussion on cash flow, you saw that at the current interest rates of 7 to 8% right now when we're doing this video, it is really hard to cash flow at higher prices. So it might be difficult when I refinance at my ARV to make that pencil out and make money month to month. The win in the scenario might just be building the equity and getting that equity built through getting in the property itself. One quick caveat that I have for investors that are looking to go more into the BRRRR strategy is to consider using a DSCR commercial loan. These are loans for LLCs, and we have a whole separate video talking about LLC commercial loans versus individual residential loans, so I'll leave that for that video. But in this type of loan, they are only going to lend you the money if the property can still cash flow. So they will back into the debt based on the income, suffice it to say. So there is an option to refinance using a DSCR loan to make it cash flow, but again, that might only be 50% LTV sometimes, or 65% LTV, loan to value. So usually in 2024, people have to compromise on either A, leaving more money in the deal, meaning you didn't get your initial capital back out through the refinance, or B, not cash flowing much at all if you get that initial capital back through the refinance. Typically, that's the compromise we notice folks have to make in this market. I actually did do the BRRRR strategy in 2023. I bought a property for 110. I invested 35,000 into it, and then my bank recently said it was worth 210,000. So by all accounts, that was a home run BRRRR because they were going to lend me money that fully refinanced all my initial capital, my acquisition price, my purchase price, and my renovation costs. They were going to refinance all of that. The downside was what we just discussed. When I got that new loan at my higher interest rate in 2024, it doesn't cash flow much. It doesn't make much money per month. So again, using the BRRRR strategy in 2024 is likely going to require some compromise to execute on it.
Recapping that, the BRRRR strategy right now really, the overarching theme is compromise. You're not always going to get all of your money back out. And honestly, if you have a ton of W-2 income just lying around, you might be better off just going after turnkey rentals in the current interest climate that we're in.